All right, everybody. I should be live. And if I am, please let me know in the chat. And if I'm not, I would also like to know because that would probably cause me some issues. But thanks for being here on another Monday night where we're going to discuss some extremely relevant topics regarding preparedness, especially here in the United States. Pay attention to this conversation because what we're discussing tonight is actually what's happening here right now. And it's a byproduct of the global conflict scenario that we're currently witnessing. And it is a likely future that we are going to witness here if things don't collapse in a more cataclysmic fashion, which is more likely, right? We understand that the collapse is more likely to happen in a slow, degrading fashion rather than some sort of cataclysmic event resetting everything to zero. So that's why we're discussing this tonight, because there's some new information surrounding these threats. There's been danger here in the United States created by some of these organizations. And we also have an attack on a United States Air Force base, which may not seem like a lot on the surface, but there could be a lot more to it. And we're going to correlate some of that possible activity with some of the organized crime activities we're discussing today. So a lot of things to go over, and I hope this is very pertinent for your preparedness, because this is most likely what you'll be facing in the future, more than any other possible scenario, in my opinion, especially based on the actions or inactions of those who are currently in charge of things like securing the southern border. So we have all the people saying hello. We got the 5x5s flying in. Tacta Squirrel says so. Harbor Prepper is here. We got Loretta Hutch with the 5x5. Kevin Brown, 8.5 by 11. We also have Jeffrey Starn saying hello, and I say hello to you as well. Oh, look, Gregor Zamina also. And Savage Lee with the 5.56 by 420. Pretty sure there's some paperwork out there that says those don't go together, but it's just paperwork, right? So I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can do live streams like this one, and I can also get out there, test out gear and equipment, and give you some feedback as to what will or will not work for certain preparedness purposes, or at least in my experience. So a big thanks to Midway USA. And then, of course, all of the live streams are directly supported by magicprepperbeef.com, which is where you can get shelf-stable, long-term survival beef that is freeze-dried, minimum 10 years, good to go. It's sous vide, ribeye, New York strip, as well as filet mignon. So make sure you check it out. If you want to have steak in the apocalypse, you can use the code magicprepper to get 15% off, which you'll want to use because this is not a cheap product. It is expensive, but it is high quality, and it is something that you don't need. It is a luxury item that you can add to your pantry in order to have versatility, protein, and some barter items in the future. So magicprepperbeef.com. There is a link in the description. I'll put one in the pinned comment as well after the live stream is done broadcasting. So now we can start getting into it, that we've given a chance for more people to get into the stream, and I think we can get started here. Nick says, I answered your email even at 3 a.m. Well, maybe we're on a different time zone, but it is true. I do try to get back to people when I am capable of it, but I can't get back to every single email that comes into my inbox because I just get a lot, and I try my best, but it's just me. I don't have a team. I don't have a secretary. I don't have anything like that. I just try my best to be on top of it. So I appreciate the feedback there, Nick. Thank you for that. Off-Road Armada, it is good to have beef with me from time to time. You know, I need to keep up on my trash talking skills in order to maintain a certain level of presence here on the YouTube platform, right? So here we are. Fish and Golf, good to see you. Now, let's get things going. Thanks for the coffee, Nick. Don't worry, I never forget. Let's talk about the danger of what's here in the country right now and what's most likely to affect you. And there's some interesting stories surrounding this particular gang that kind of emulates, or at least in the minimum, possibly predicts our future regarding how we should expect these things to unfold here, okay? Sheriff Alliance warns of serious threat of violence by Tren de Aragua across America. Okay, now this is a story from, let's see here, August 16th. Why can't everyone just post their dates in the same place, right? And in case you're new here, we do go over things that are relevant to preparedness over the previous week, as well as going back into history a little bit further to build context, especially in these more complicated conversations like we're having tonight. We're going to go back in history quite a few times to give you some ideas about how this is all developing, not just what it is doing right this second. And at the same time, I also want to mention Replay Crew. You guys are awesome. Make sure you check it in the comments because I appreciate knowing that you come back for the information. Leadership from the American Sheriff Alliance has demanded that the threat from a Venezuelan-based gang against U.S. law enforcement be addressed with action. Now, we knew about this threat. We talked about it here on this channel in a live stream, right? So make sure you're hitting the subscribe button and you're hitting that notification bell so you can be here every week, because these things actually do tend to pile up on each other, because I try to identify things that make sense for being possible risks or things we need to pay attention to regarding preparedness. So it seems like they come back around every so often. According to an August 13th press release from the American Sheriff Alliance, the gang known as Tren de Aragua had issued a green light to its members to attack and fire upon U.S. law enforcement officers. TDA, which is what federal agencies are referring to this gang as at this point, participates in human smuggling and trafficking, kidnapping, extortion schemes, and moving illicit narcotics in their areas of operation, continues the press release. The TDA began in the Venezuelan prison system and has grown to over 5,000 members, with many of its members having entered the United States. The U.S. Treasury has designated TDA as a transnational criminal organization. When we allow a brutal and violent gang like TDA to operate in the United States, we have failed in terms of border security, said Sheriff Kieran Donahue, the National Sheriff's Association's president, which is hard to argue with, right? I mean, I think we can all pretty much agree that border security is a failure at this point in time. One such example offered in the press release was a jewelry heist by TDA gang members that resulted in a brutal attack against multiple women in Denver on June 24th. Now, some of the stories we're going to talk about tonight aren't in border states. They're in places like Colorado. These people have already infiltrated into the United States much further than you would just expect it to be, in the sense of Texas or Arizona or New Mexico. No, they're in the country. Like, that's it. Once they're in, they're everywhere. And in Colorado, we just had a very good example of what they're capable of and what they're willing to do. A security video shows multiple men unlawfully entering the store's rear area, where the gang members repeatedly struck and pistol whipped 2 female employees and then forcibly pulled the women across the room by their hair. 2 more men were observed using guns to threaten others, jumping over the counter and grabbing jewelry from the shelf and display case, reported the Denver Post. The jewelry store, Joyeria El Ruby, is a family-owned business that has been operating for 24 years. The lack of border security is opening doors for more violence against Americans. I think we already knew that. But this TDA thing is pretty new, and they're pretty brazen. There's a little bit more to it for why we need to be paying attention to what they're up to. Since U.S. Customs and Border Protection had its first apprehension of a TDA member in March 2023, okay, so we're talking a year and 5 months is since the first time they apprehended one of their members at the border, okay? There have been 70 additional apprehensions within the United States. The total number of TDA members operating in the United States is unknown due to the number of gotaways entering the country, as well as those who may have been recruited domestically since TDA has showed its presence in the country, reads the American Sheriff Alliance press release, okay? Now, this is new, right? This statement was released August 13th. There's a reason why they're so concerned about this. And there's a reason why we're going to talk about warlords in our future, right? And the reason I put that on the thumbnail tonight is because what we're witnessing happening here has already happened in other third world countries, especially in Latin America. And what they're trying to do here is exactly what they do there, because that's their MO. That's what they know. That's what they always do. It's not like they're going to change their entire strategy just because they're here now. So understand that we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some other criminal activities that are happening from similar groups from similar places, South America specifically, that are targeting specific people here in the United States. So those of you who are in the chat tonight will be aware of that in case it represents your community and it's something you should be aware of. And then we also are going to talk about how, how this whole warlord thing goes, because we have a lot of evidence of that happening in places like El Salvador, Brazil, and guess what? Starting to occur in Tennessee. So let's keep moving forward on this. Checking in the chat real quick. South Florida DCL, good evening to you as well. Gregor Zamina, is this the same group that have been staying in national parks in the U.S. and setting up these base camps? Quite possibly, but it's hard to really pin down who that is because that's cartels of all different flavors, especially if they're able to grow certain products within those confines. So keep that in mind, and that is a real issue that we have as well. But this particular group is doing things a little differently, actually. So this is very interesting. Now, this story is actually from earlier this month, I believe. Let's see here. August 8th. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because of what the Sheriff's Association just put out, right? So let's talk about this now. Special task force investigating Venezuelan gangs' alleged ties to Aurora. Colorado once again comes up. Interestingly enough, sounds like they've set up shop there quite well. But here's something that they're starting to do that you should really be considering because this is what they're going to do. And it could happen in your neighborhood or your community or your apartment complex. Aurora City Council officials say an apartment complex on Nome Street is closing due to code violations. But some council members allege there's more to the story. Aurora, Colorado, the Aurora Police Department said it has assigned detectives to a special task force to investigate a Venezuelan gang's alleged connections to the city. The announcement came during a city council public safety meeting on Thursday. We have stood up a task force specific to this group, said ADP Acting Deputy Chief Chris Jewell. We are actively looking at who they are, what they're doing, how many are there, what is the reality of the situation compared to what the other public information that's going on around out there nationally is. The gang, known as Tren de Aragua, right? Here we are again. This is them. Started out as a prison gang in Venezuela, right? We know this already. The Aurora Police Department, in partnership with the Raven Task Force, has assigned 4 detectives to a special task force that includes additional local, state, and federal partners to investigate violent crime impacting our migrant community, said an Aurora PD spokesperson late Thursday. In recent days, social media has been flooded with accusations that the Tren de Aragua gang had taken over an Aurora apartment complex. The city is closing near Colfax and Peoria. These claims have not been confirmed by either Aurora PD or the city of Aurora. The property located at 1568 Nome Street is home to a large immigrant population. The city of Aurora said the site is closing due to a long list of code violations. We're not buying this, said Aurora City Councilwoman Danielle Jurinsky. We believe that, yes, there are code violations, but this started because of a gang takeover. That's what we believe. Property management claims the gang has taken over the site. An investor with the property told Denver 7 the site had become too dangerous for staff to work there. Tenants confirmed they have not seen the manager on site for some time. We've been trying to get in touch with the manager. He quit. We have no manager, said Shira Kayes. Or Kays. I'm not sure how that one works. Kays said most of the tenants are good people. I know it's been shootings here, but it's not because of people from here. It's people from other places that are coming here looking for problems, okay? So, listen, what's happening here is what happens in many other countries, but it's happening here in Aurora, Colorado. This is not another country. This is the United States of America. This is what they do. They come in, they take over places that are abandoned or vacant or possibly even condemned, and they set up shop. Or they find places where poor people are, where there's less management, less oversight, less interest from the public, especially from the elite class, about what's happening there. And they just move in. And then anybody who gets in their way doesn't exist anymore. So this is happening. Now, the city is trying to say that it's just code violations, right? But the residents and the property management are both saying that a gang has taken over this entire complex and that they have to be rid of it because it's too dangerous to operate there or live there anymore. Now, keep this in mind as we move forward in tonight's conversation, because one way you establish a warlordship, right, over a certain region is by taking over territory. And these things don't have to be on a large scale. Some of these apartment complexes have enough people inside and cover enough property that it's all you need to operate a criminal entity. And it's defensible enough where law enforcement aren't willing to take the risk to deal with what's happening inside. So this is just the start of it, right? This is the MO. This is what they're doing. This is what they'll continue to do. Now we have some other interesting developments, and we're going to go back to the Tren de Aragua gang here in just a little bit. But we're also going to talk about some other gang activity from South America that's targeting specific communities here in the United States. And members have been arrested recently. RICO charges have been filed. All kinds of stuff's going on. And this is scary stuff that these people are doing. And so I need you all to be aware of it, because one of the biggest reasons why we do these live streams is so that members of this community can be well informed, so they can be better off in their planning when it comes to their preparedness. And if you don't take things seriously because you're not aware of there being a threat, then you might find yourself being a victim one day, right? So, no manager, but I bet someone is still collecting that rent money, said Yardbirds. And I bet you're right. 100%. Someone's still collecting rent, no doubt. Let's see here. Viv B, Ice Age Farmer, Adapt 2030, and of course, Magic Prepper. I'm not sure who we're all relating to there, but I appreciate the shout out there with all those other people. Mark Burrell, I miss Risky Krisky. Well, he's still around out there in the ether, so you can find him. Let's just say that. But we definitely, the community definitely needs some more of that schizo rant type stuff, because sometimes it's good to just be on that page, right? Now, let's go ahead and jump over to this Colombian gang that's ransacking homes in Florida with clever disguises as cops issue warning. Now, this story is very interesting to me. It gives us a few things to consider. Actually, this gives us a lot of things to consider. And this is why people underestimate the danger of SHTF and the danger of a degrading society in a wartime environment where we have adversaries inside and out. And a lot of people say that, putting focus on, the tactical stuff or like the gear and everything else, right? So especially when you start getting into more expensive stuff, drones, thermal, night vision, stuff like that, a lot of people will write it off as being unnecessary or kind of like fantasy, right? But these people are using tactics that are far surpassing what you and your buddies are probably doing on a weekend camping trip, right? So going out there and learning bushcraft is great. But while you're doing that, these people are robbing the crap out of your house because they've been using advanced tactics against you for the past month. I'm not kidding. We're going to talk about it right now. Colombian gang ransacking homes in Florida with clever disguise as cops issue warning. Also, I want to mention that this disguise thing, we need to keep that in mind as we move forward and talk about more of what's happening tonight. And I want you to remind me in the chat and just keep this in mind. Once we hit the information about the U.S. Air Force Base attack that just occurred, right? I want you to remember this whole conversation about disguises. Okay. And hopefully by me saying that, I will too. A highly organized Colombian gang stole $1.4 million in cash and jewels after breaking into several high-end Florida homes. And just so we're on the same page, this story is from August 18th, yesterday. 3 men and 1 woman slipped over the border as they raided the Polk County area of Florida in a string of attacks on wealthy middle-class homes and businesses. Sheriff Grady Judd said the gang had a detailed method for their crimes, including intricate disguises, Wi-Fi jamming, and equipment to bypass alarm systems. Sheriff Judd branded them members of the South American theft group and slammed the non-existent immigration system. Okay. Here's the 4 people who are, currently suspects in this case. Geraldine Galano Perez, 33, her lover Milton Ayala Sierra, 25, Jason Higuera Ruiz, 41, and Galer Orobio Cabezas, 36, had set up the intricate and highly patient surveillance, and Galano, described as a violent, dangerous Colombian criminal, had even previously disguised herself by wearing a burqa while walking by one of the targeted homes. I'm reading this article to you because I want you to absorb all the tactics that these people are using right now. Getting your home robbed might not be the end of the world as we know it, right? You might have insurance, you might have ways of recuperating after that. But for some people right now, with the way the world is and the way the economy is, it could ruin their life, right? This is real life stuff that's happening right now. As our country becomes more third world every day, this is the slow boil SHTF that everyone warned you about. You're the frog in the pot right now, and you're getting robbed while you think you're in a hot tub, okay? The gang from the Colombian capital, Bogota, also often took photographs of the victims, and Judd said the gang was responsible for at least 9 burglaries in Polk and nearby counties, Hillsborough, Pasco, Collier, Pinellas, and Manatee County, mostly targeting Asian American victims. Now, first off, I was born in Manatee County, so this hits a little close to home. Second off, okay, Asian Americans have been targeted by these gangs specifically all over the country, all over Washington, Arizona, California, here as well. It's happening everywhere. And if you're an Asian American in this community right now, you need to be really paying attention to this. They are targeting you, especially if you're a business owner. And where they're finding these people often is based on restaurants. They own a Chinese restaurant. They own a Japanese restaurant. They own a Vietnamese restaurant. That's how they're finding a lot of their victims, okay? They assume they have money, and they assume they won't put up much of a fight. So if you're an Asian American right now and you're reading this information, you should be considering how to harden your home defense and how to put up a fight when that time comes. And since you're in this chat right now, or you're watching this replay and you're part of this community, I bet you already do. But just be aware, these people, and not just these people, other entities and other parts of the country are specifically targeting Asian Americans, okay? And I wanted to bring this up because if you're part of that community, you should be aware of this. I mean, this is definitely a consideration you need to make, okay? They would watch businesses and restaurants and follow the owners as they returned home. And according to Daily Mail, one business owner was wiped out after being hit. Hardly any of the gang's haul has been recovered. The sheriff has slammed the current border controls and deportation system and shared his frustration that Higuera Ruiz and Ayala Sierra are in hiding after Immigration and Customs Enforcement released them following the April arrests. He said, "We don't have a broken immigration system in the United States of America. We have a non-existent immigration system in the United States of America." Okay? Now, here's what he's saying about the criminals. They do their due diligence and study the victims' patterns. The gang will take photos of restaurants, seeking out the owners, looking at public records, and setting up intricate surveillance. They will also take photos of victims' houses to look at alarm systems and neighborhood cameras. And once they have gathered all of their evidence, will then pounce. Okay? They will dress in burqas. They will dress in lawn maintenance equipment, uniforms like they're with a lawn service. They will ride scooters through the neighborhood. They'll be wearing jogging clothes. And once they see the path is clear, that's when they break in and steal large amounts of items. The sheriff said dangerous and violent Galliano had crossed the border on July 13th, 2021, and was a catch and release. She has already racked up dozens of charges against her, some of which include burglary, theft of $100,000 or more, and dealing in stolen property. Okay? This is happening right now in America, and it's only going to get worse. And this is our slow decline towards dystopia. And these people are just bringing what they have back home here, and we're becoming their home now. And it's not just in Florida or in Colorado, it's also in Washington. So, to pop this up on the screen, we're going to talk about RICO charges regarding a very similar situation. Justin Bryan, or Just Brian, you're welcome, and thank you for the gratitude. I really appreciate it, and I do what I can. I'm trying my best to give you information that's relevant to you as an American or as someone who's concerned about preparedness that could actually be affected by this, right? It's not always just about World War III. It's not always just about the economy collapsing. Sometimes it's criminal organizations taking advantage of our current situation and leveraging against the average person. And that's what's happening, and that's what will happen and continue to escalate as things move on in the same direction they're currently going in. It's very upsetting, but it's happening, okay? Now, let's get into a RICO case, which is interesting because these charges haven't been filed for 17 years in Washington, right? So this is happening. August 15th, 2024, two men face RICO charges for violent home robberies in Western Washington that targeted Asian Americans once again. These criminals from South America and Latin America are specifically targeting this community for many reasons. There is an assumption of wealth. There is an assumption of weakness. There's a lot of things going on here. And maybe a lot of the members of that community are very complacent when it comes to their home defense, when it comes to their ability to defend themselves. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. But in reality, they're being targeted for a reason. And if you're in that community, I highly recommend you do what you need to do to be safe in this current situation, because there's an entire criminal organization specifically targeting you. Federal prosecutors in Seattle have indicted 2 men on rarely used racketeering charges related to a series of violent home robberies throughout Western Washington, targeting Asian Americans in 2022. They said the charges follow a lengthy investigation across multiple jurisdictions that remains ongoing. The men, Kevin Thistle and Christopher Johnson, are accused of organizing and committing at least 7 robberies. They each face 1 federal count of racketeering and 1 count of conspiracy. Each count has a maximum penalty of life in prison. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, those names don't sound very South American, now do they? Well, no, they don't. But here's the interesting part. This is all part of an organized organization, right, that's operated in Washington, Arizona, and elsewhere. And the strangest part about it is that they don't tell you what organization it is. And so let's just say, I think we know what's going on here, especially based on other crimes that are happening in the exact same fashion in other parts of the country. Just because people aren't from those areas or aren't necessarily related to the situation there, doesn't mean they're not being recruited, and doesn't mean that they're not willing to get involved or be adjacent to in order to make a profit. Just be aware of that, okay? They're also accused of committing kidnappings and murder in the course of robberies that ranged from South King to Snohomish and Skagit counties. The indictment also alleges they were part of a criminal organization that operated in Washington, Arizona, and elsewhere. Okay? This is why they start talking about why they used RICO. The last time they used it was against Hell's Angels. Okay? Richard Collodi, the FBI special agent in charge in Seattle, said the crews performing these robberies followed similar procedures each time, wearing masks, carrying firearms, and bursting into homes in the middle of the night. Many actions of the defendants in this case were specifically designed to cause fear, he said. They kidnapped multiple people. They pretended to be the police, disguised as once again. They disabled cameras and even restrained children. Officials said that robberies specifically targeted Asian Americans because, according to the indictment, they perceived Asian victims to be weaker. The charges so far don't allege that the men conspired to commit civil rights violations or hate crimes. But Gorman said, we'll take civil rights violations extremely seriously, and if there is one that could meet the elements, we would definitely bring it. Okay? Now, this is all going on, and the strangest part about it is that, and they tied up people's kids, they kidnapped people. People were shot during the robberies. All kinds of horrible things were going on with this organization. And it has the same MO as the people who just got arrested in Florida doing the same exact thing. This is all bigger. It's all connected. And they told us it's connected. They just didn't tell us who the organization was, which is probably because it's an ongoing investigation. But I think we can all start to develop our own opinions as to what's really happening here. High-vis vest equals possible threat. I close driveway far from us, and I keep my pit bull loose. We also carry at all times. We out in the sticks. Well, yeah, if you're out in the sticks and someone shows up in a high-vis vest, things are a little odd sometimes, right? Let's see here. We also have Savage Lee says they're all trespassers to me. All right, now, let's talk about what happened at this Air Force base. And like I said, and I'm not trying to be facetious, and I'm not trying to be, unserious here by any means. But if you are an Asian American, you need to be aware that these things are happening to your community, specifically to you. And if, regardless of you not being weak, right, or not being prepared or whatever, they don't know that, or they might know that because they've been stalking you for a month. So please just make sure you're doing your due diligence to be safe out there. And it's, like I said, it's not just in Colorado or Washington or Florida. Anywhere you are, it could be happening to you. You could be being staked out right now. Okay. Nick said, True Fuel gas cans, 4 or 2 cycles sold at Lowe's, have a 5+ year shelf life and may last longer. Blue Can emergency water lasts as well. Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Nick. Always good to get more tips from the community here. Now, what happened with this Air Force base? Why are we talking about that tonight as well? Because there's things I want to consider based on some current information regarding some of these gangs, especially the Tren de Aragua gang. And I think we should just consider where we're at this point in time when we have our service personnel being shot at at a military base by people who aren't being caught. That should concern you. It concerns me. Shootings reported at Joint Base San Antonio Lackland between guards and passing vehicle. Okay. We can just turn that off. Great. Okay. Officials at Joint Base San Antonio Lackland say Air Force security guards exchanged gunfire with someone who twice opened fire at an entrance to the base. Okay. U.S. Air Force security guards exchanged gunfire with someone who twice opened fire on an entrance to Joint Base San Antonio Lackland early Saturday, according to its spokesperson for the base. It was an off-base shooting from a passing vehicle that fired shots towards the gate, prompting our security forces to respond. Base spokesperson Stephanie Antosh said in a statement, "There's no threat to the installation. We had no injuries and no fatalities." Isn't it interesting that after being shot at under mysterious circumstances, the first thing they let you know is that there's no threat? I guess so, like now there's no threat. Don't worry. Anyway, Antosh said the shooting was being investigated by San Antonio police, who said in a release that the first shooting occurred at about 2:15 in the morning. The security personnel stated they heard several shots fired, as well as the fired rounds go past them. Sergeant Washington Moscoso said in the release, after this incident, the security personnel added more armed guards as a precaution. A vehicle later stopped near the same entrance shortly after 4:30 in the morning, Moscoso said. For a second time, shots were fired at the Air Force security personnel. However, with the additional security personnel present, multiple Air Force personnel returned fire toward the suspect vehicle, Moscoso said. The vehicle then fled. No injuries were reported, and the shootings remained under investigation. It was not known how many rounds were fired, how many shooters there were, or what their motive was, according to Antosh. The entrance was closed for several hours after the shooting before reopening at about 9:30 in the morning, but the base was not locked down, which I find interesting. And just be aware that if this is a probing maneuver, right? If these people are just trying to figure out what would happen if you shot at a U.S. Air Force base inside the U.S., right? Where they're probably a little more complacent and a little more lackadaisical about security because, nothing ever happens here. Well, they're learning quite a bit right now. Like, okay, well, they're not going to lock down. They're going to open like 5 hours later. Maybe that's not that big of a deal, but, that could change next time for all we know. I'm just throwing this out there as a thing to consider, that if this is a probing operation, they're getting this data back in return. Okay. Now, Lackland is home to more than 24,000 active duty members. So imagine having the balls to jump in a car, drive to an Air Force base gate, and shoot at security personnel there, knowing there's 24,000 servicemen on those grounds, right? But guess what? They weren't caught. They weren't stopped. What? So, interestingly enough, that story was, of course, from ABC. Now, this story is from San Antonio News, which is a little bit more nuanced and gives us some things to consider that we didn't hear about in the last story that I thought was worth bringing up, because there's a little bit more to the story than what most of the mainstream is saying. Okay. Now, I want to jump over here. Oki Khan, good to see you. Appreciate it. How about having our soldiers armed at the military bases? Well, I'm pretty sure they are, but I think, like I said, there's probably some level of complacency or normalcy bias, because when has that ever happened, right? So, of course, our troops are trained and meant to be on guard 24/7, but who knows how long they've been working that post and how long they've been in that position and how often nothing has ever happened, right? So at what point do you just kind of pause because you're not sure what's happening? Like, these things occur because nothing ever happens, right? Which is a big sentiment here in the preparedness community that we get thrown in our face constantly. And then that's how those people will react when something happens, because, they just thought it wouldn't. So keep this in mind. This is more interesting to me in this story because a couple other details come out. Security officials at Joint Base San Antonio Lackland returned fire when bullets started flying their way early Saturday morning. It happened at the main gate of the Chapman Training Annex on Ray Ellison Boulevard. Around 2 a.m., someone started shooting at security guards stationed at the gate. They couldn't see who was shooting, but could hear the bullets whizzing by them. So that indicates a couple things to me. One, they didn't know where the gunshots were coming from, which means there was probably not necessarily a vehicle involved, because they knew a vehicle pulled up the second time around. So that's an interesting perspective to understand, right? Secondly, they didn't know they were being shot at until they heard the bullets whizzing by, which means, A, they were very lucky not to get hit, but B, that these people were, obscured to some degree to where their position wasn't easily recognizable, and they were able to make shots without alerting the troops that they were shooting at them until the bullets were coming by, which would assume that maybe they're using suppressors or maybe they were very long range or whatever it might be. But it gives you some things to consider because you would think they would hear the gunshots, not necessarily the bullets whizzing by them. So I find that to be an interesting data point that was left out through a lot of the other stories that are being told. So keep that in mind because it just gives us an idea of what this may have been, right? If they're first prodding with gunfire from long distance and then they don't really get the response they expect, maybe that's what gave them the motivation or the courage to jump in a car and pull right up to the gate and see what would happen next. And for all we know, this could be a gang initiation, right? They have a lot of strange practices when it comes to joining these gangs, and this could definitely be one of them. But we're going to talk about that here in just a second. After the shooting, more guards were added, but about 2 hours later, a vehicle stopped on Medina Base Road, and the occupants began shooting at the Air Force security officers. They returned fire. No injuries were reported. The investigation continues. Nobody has been arrested or anything as of yet, which I also find to be very interesting. So if you were a foreign adversary, right, and you had agents inside the country, sleeper cells, whatever you want to call them, right? And you wanted to find out just what you could do against a military installation in the United States. How hard would it be to say, hey, I want you to go shoot a couple rounds off at them, see what it does, report back. Okay, they report back. 2 hours later, they're like, hey, I want you to go back, but I want you to drive right up to the gate and shoot at them from the car and see what happens. And so they go do that, and then they drive back, right? And now they have this information. Okay, well, when we were long range or we were using suppressors or we were obscured or whatever it was that we were doing, they didn't even know we were shooting at them until they heard our bullets, right? Cool. So we know that for a possible future operation. Now we also know that if we just come right up to the gate with a vehicle, they don't stop us until we get within range of shooting at them, and they shoot back at us, but only after we shoot at them. More data to bring it back to base or whatever their FOB is or whatever. And now they have more data to work with for next time, right? But there could be more motives here. And I think that there probably were more motives here. Now, remember earlier in the chat, hold on. Let's do a poll real quick just because I think they're fun. We have fun with this. And I'm going to ask you in the poll so I can see how many of you actually remember this. Do you remember when I said, that's a 0, that's not an I, said to keep disguises in mind? Because I remember now. Do you remember? Okay. Poll has begun. Do you remember when I said to keep disguises in mind? Because there was a lot of disguises being used in a lot of those other things we discussed earlier, wasn't there? Okay. Here's something I want you to think about. And this was something that was brought to my attention by a good friend of mine. So I appreciate you making me think about these things and being more analytical about some of this stuff that's happening from a mindset that I don't currently possess from lack of experience, right? So, which is why it's good to have lots of people within your network that you can rely on or run information by to see whether or not your thought process is at least somewhat going in the right direction. Very important in my opinion. So the whole disguises thing had me thinking about this thanks to, like I said, my good friend bringing it up and some other information, like I said, regarding those gang-related activities in Florida and in Colorado and everywhere else where this stuff is happening, right? Washington specifically with the RICO charges. But these people are using disguises, dressed as police officers, utilitarian workers. But what if they wanted to get dressed as soldiers? What if they wanted to get American military equipment? What if they wanted to get access to American military facilities? How would they do it? Well, one thing that we could talk about is how they've done it in Mexico and what has happened in Mexico regarding soldiers and their uniforms and things of that nature. And then some of this maybe starts to make a little more sense for why this was such a small scale operation and what their goal may have been if they were able to accomplish what they were trying to do. What do I mean? Okay, this is a story from 2010, but it gives you a good demonstration as to this tactic being used by cartels, right? Gang members in Mexico, which is what we're seeing now. You know, it's not far-fetched to think we're only about 15 to 20 years behind Mexico, right? And here we are in 2024. This is an article from 2010. 8 suspected drug gang gunmen died in a battle with Mexican soldiers in the remote mountains of northern Chihuahua State, the Federal Public Safety Department said Thursday. Okay, the department cited an internal Army report saying the clash occurred near the rural town of Madera, about 145 miles south of the U.S. border. Not too far off, right? Now, here's where we're going to get into some more interesting things regarding this whole situation. All right, let's see here. A statement by the 8th Military Region Command said drug traffickers had painted the trucks to disguise themselves as military personnel and to confuse the public and cover up their illegal acts. The Army has been the subject of numerous human rights complaints since it moved into a frontline role against drug gangs in late 2006. The military claims drug gangs have used Army uniforms to discredit troops. This is what they do. This is what's been happening in Mexico for decades. We're just now maybe starting to taste some of it here. And in Mexico, these gangs and these cartels are not afraid to go toe-to-toe with the military. They're just not. Because in general, they're still considered criminals. They're, in many cases, considered possible citizens, right? Like, you don't know these people are illegal immigrants or if they're U.S. citizens until after the fact, until either you detain them or you ID their bodies, right? You just don't know. So the military doesn't necessarily want to just start dropping bombs on potential U.S. citizens without due process. So it creates a level of confusion. And then what they can do is not only just organize against them with small arms fire, because like I said, military's not calling A-10s in because a guy in a Toyota Corolla pulled up with an AK. They're not really sure what they're going to do in that situation in the U.S., let's say, right? But if guy is successful and gains, I don't know, uniforms in the process, weaponry in the process, access ID cards, and all kinds of other things in the process, then they can utilize that equipment for future operations, whether or not that's to gain entry into military installations, whether or not that's to wear these uniforms when committing illegal acts, so that if they get caught or if there's any level of surveillance, it's being blamed on the military rather than them. There's a lot of reasons for why this could all be happening. And I wanted to bring this up because it's an interesting concept that this is the stuff they're doing in Mexico, right? Like, this is... Thursday, the Army command in the border state of Tamaulipas said soldiers seized 2 extended pickup trucks painted with Mexican Army emblems and colors near the border community. Like, this is one of their actions that they take. So, why am I bringing that up right now? Mitch, still talking about BS? I mean, we're still talking. What are you talking about? Probably BS. So, let's talk about where the new Boogeyman Gang is setting up shop and why this might be relevant. The Tren de Aragua Gang, they moved their headquarters. Where'd they move it to? Well, from Venezuela, right? They were in the prison where everything was set up and ready to go. They had a zoo there. They had a swimming pool and a nightclub. It must have been a really nice prison, actually. But now, they're right outside El Paso. What? Yep. Bloodthirsty super gang Tren de Aragua moves its headquarters to outskirts of major U.S. city as fearful cops warn of telltale tattoos Americans should watch out for. This is from August 5th. Okay, now, yeah, that's, a couple weeks ago, but this is relevant to the information we're discussing tonight, and this is still very new regarding world events and things that are happening here in the country, okay? Venezuela's most violent gang, which has already sparked chaos across the U.S., has moved its headquarters to the outskirts of a major American city, DailyMail.com can exclusively reveal. Dubbed the epitome of evil, the notorious criminal organization Tren de Aragua, or TDA as it's known by federal agents, previously operated out of an infamous South American prison, so completely under gang leaders' control that it had its own zoo, swimming pool, and a nightclub, which I guess I just said. But after Kingpin Hector Guerrero Flores escaped last year, the mafia moved its command center to Ciudad Juarez in Mexico on the U.S. border, directly across from El Paso, Texas. El Paso officials who asked to remain anonymous now fear gang violence will spill over into Texas's 6th largest city, which is currently ranked among the top 10 safest in America by the FBI. Dozens of gangsters have already been caught trying to sneak into the U.S., with those who have been successful unleashing a terrifying crime wave across the country from Dallas to New York. Like I said, this is not only isolated to border states. Border Patrol agents are now on high alert and have been warned to check migrants for telltale tattoos that can help identify gang members. Here's the map that was part of tonight's thumbnail to kind of show you that they came from Venezuela all the way to the border, just right up to it. And El Paso's not San Antonio, but like I said, this is not very far away either, no matter where you are in the country. But San Antonio certainly is pretty close to El Paso compared to New York or Colorado. So these are things you should be thinking about when these stories are coming together. How are we piecing all these puzzles together? Even if China, for example, was behind this U.S. Army base attack, it wouldn't be Chinese soldiers who would be doing it. It would be their cartel kingpins organizing it and orchestrating it and using pawns in order to pull it off, right? These are the things you have to be thinking about right now. We're not going to see Chinese troops on the ground if they don't have to, because why not just use criminals? They seem to be willing and they seem to be abundant. And part of it is because we're just letting them come in. Now, here's their tattoos, by the way, in case you're curious. I would just say, maybe this isn't the worst thing to kind of look at for a second, but you got Jordan, the Jumpman symbol. We got AKs, trains, crowns, clocks. We have the stars, which is the nautical star, skull with a gas mask. Oh, I don't know if that's not good or whatever, but I do have this emoji that I just put in the live chat, so I hope I don't get flagged. But anyway, those are good things for you to just think about in case, you're out and about, things don't seem quite right. You've got some guys being sketchy or whatever at your local community grocery store or wherever, right? Somewhere that you usually frequent where you don't see this kind of stuff generally. And then you start noticing some of these tattoos, it might give you an idea of what might be happening in your area. Okay. Tren de Aragua is the epitome of evil, Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who represents El Paso, said. Okay. Now, they do horrible things. Everything about it's awful. They are violent. They are dangerous. They're scary. And they do not spare children or women or anyone. So be aware of this. But the reason I brought this up was because they set up shop right across the border in Texas. They also just gave their members the green light to open fire on law enforcement here in the United States. I don't find it overly far-fetched that they'd be willing to do something against service personnel either, especially if there was a higher end goal in mind of either, like I said, acquiring equipment, access, uniforms, all of the above, whatever it might have been, even if it's just to sell the data, which, by the way, is a thing that you can do if you're in an illicit organization. Do you think that there's foreign adversaries out there who would be willing to buy the debrief of that attack from this particular entity? I would assume so, right? Hey, highest bidder, want to know what it's like to shoot at an actual American Air Force base inside of America and what they did in reaction to it? Here's all the data. Here's what we did. Here's what they did, just so you have that info, right? So all these things are possible motives. But once we can start seeing how all these things are adding up in the same time period, it really starts to make you question what's happening, right? These gangs are coming in. They're setting up shop. And they're going to start setting up regions of operation as well. Warlords are in our future, whether we like it or not. And the poorest Americans are going to be under their control. What do I mean by that? Well, it's happened in their countries. It's happened in Southern America. It's going to be happening here, and it already is happening here on an official level, in an official capacity. But we're not looking at it that way yet because we still have normalcy bias. First, let's talk about El Salvador. El Salvador and their government has been working directly with criminal organizations for quite some time because they found that working with them, negotiating with them, looking the other way and allowing them to operate with impunity is actually better for business than trying to constantly fight them, especially when it comes to having some leverage while negotiating. We're upset about it here in the U.S., which is going to be ironic here in just a minute when we get to the next story. But this is from 2 years ago, okay? Now, actually 3 years ago, whatever. It's from a while ago. But this is important because it shows you how we stand on it officially, but what we're doing now doesn't add up and what we should expect in the future based on this exact scenario. The U.S. has accused the government of El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele, of secretly negotiating a truce with the leaders of the country's feared MS-13 and Barrio 18 street gangs. The explosive accusation on Wednesday cuts to the heart of one of Bukele's most highly touted successes in office, a plunge in the country's murder rate. Interesting. I think Bukele is the way to say this. I honestly don't know, but I'm not too worried about it either. Bukele's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but Bukele vehemently denied similar accusations when they were reported in August 2020 by the local news site El Faro. The U.S. Treasury announcement came as it designated 2 officials from Bukele's government for financial sanctions. The 2 officials accused of negotiating directly with the gang leaders were Osiris Luna Mesa, chief of the Salvadorian penal system and vice minister of justice and public security, and Carlos Amilcar Marroquin Chica, chairman of the Social Fabric Reconstruction Unit. In 2020, Bukele's administration provided financial incentives to Salvadoran gangs MS-13 and 18th Street Gang Barrio 18 to ensure that incidents of gang violence and the number of confirmed homicides remained low. The Treasury statement said, over the course of these negotiations with Luna and Marroquin, gang leadership also agreed to provide political support to the Nuevas Ideas political party in upcoming elections. Wow. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Do you think that any particular political parties would be willing to work with some of these criminal organizations in order to garner additional support while also allowing all of their members into the country without any real issue? I don't know. You tell me. Bukele's New Ideas Party won legislative elections earlier this year in a landslide, giving it control of El Salvador's Congress. Well, how convenient. The announcement comes as a number of former officials from previous administrations are being prosecuted for negotiating a similar pact with the gangs. So, in El Salvador, the government said, hey, gang, you're here and you control this area. You're cool. Just make sure you get people to vote for us so we can keep up this little partnership we have. And we won't come after you as long as you can pull back on the murder and slow down on the homicide, right? And try to keep a lower profile. Then we'll leave you alone, right? And then we have a good mutual relationship because it's good for our poll numbers because, look, we helped crime. But at the same time, like, you guys can keep doing all your money-making stuff. Just keep the violence down. That's what's happening here, okay? Now, why is it going to happen in America? Well, first off, I think we know there's people in this country that would just allow it to happen and work with these people gladly because they don't know what else to do. I come for the hand waving. I stay for the hand waving. Great. All right, Dorian, I appreciate you. Now, check this out, okay? In Memphis, okay, this is from March this year. This is where it begins. Okay, this is where it starts. It's not to the same level yet, but this is where it all begins. When public office and public officials start to recognize these entities as being official in some format, and then start negotiating and talking to them as if they have the leverage to do so, or as if they have the validation to be at the negotiating table, which gives them exactly that. Memphis mayor meets with gang leaders to request ceasefire in an effort to curb city's gun violence. Right? So stunning and brave. A record-breaking 398 people fell victim to homicides in Memphis last year. Got it. In an effort to curb criminality, Memphis Mayor Paul Young, who took office in January with a focus on public safety, recently met with some of the city's highest-ranking gang leaders in Memphis and crafted a ceasefire between the groups for 7 days. My ask for them in that conversation was, can we get a 7-day ceasefire? Just 7 days where there's no shooting and no killing, the mayor said during a youth development panel discussion. And they said, yeah, we would be willing to do that. And they gave me a couple of caveats. Some of them requested terms included assurances their rival gangs would agree to the ceasefire, as well as help getting well-paying jobs and the training needed to access them. Right. That was their big concern. This is still extortion. Okay, we won't kill anyone for the next 7 days as long as you make it so the guys who usually kill us also say they won't kill us, and you got to find us high-paying jobs, right? It's still extortion. It doesn't matter if it's in an effort to help the community. This is exactly how this starts, and it's starting in this country. This is already happening this year, and the gangs are just saying, Our young guys just need something to do. They steal cars because it's fun, because there's a lack of activities in their community. They need ways to earn income. Just know. Don't care, it's ridiculous. Listen, we're doing this. And these warlord fiefdoms are going to eventually grow in size. Whether or not it's an apartment complex being taken over by Tren de Aragua, or whether or not it's these gang leaders in Memphis, Tennessee, who are now getting a seat with the mayor to talk about what they're willing to do or not do, when in all reality, it's the mayor's job to basically just get rid of them, right? They're not supposed to come in to have a little talk. They just shouldn't exist anymore. But here we are, okay? Here's an example of what we're going to look like soon. I don't know if it's this year. I don't know if it's in 5 years, but I know if things keep going in the direction they're currently going in, and if we don't find ourselves in a cataclysmic nuclear war with Russia or China, then this is America in 10 or 15 years, especially if certain groups of people have their way, which we know there are people who want this country to fall. They're willing to open up the borders. They're willing to work with criminals. They're willing to let things slide as long as it doesn't happen in their nice neighborhoods. And that's just the truth, okay? So I want you to think about Brazil. Because Brazil, for all intents and purposes, has parts of it that are first world. It's not necessarily a third world country everywhere you go. But there are definitely some third world things about Brazil. And just to kind of paint a little picture here, if you don't know what a favela is, it is a shanty town, basically, right? And favelas are in places increasingly recognized by planners and architects for their low-rise, high-density development, pedestrian orientation, use of bikes. They have homes above shops. 85% of all housing worldwide is built illegally, right? In highly urbanized Latin America, 1/3 of all city dwellers live in informal conditions. So the favela is exactly what it looks like in this picture. So now you know what a favela is, right? I didn't really need to explain it too much. Dorian Gray, I appreciate that. I would suggest finding new hobbies just so you can actually be on these live streams and not sitting in a cell somewhere, but I'm just throwing it out there, okay? So why am I talking about favelas? Because here's what Brazil is dealing with now in just Rio de Janeiro, like just in the one major city, okay? The one major city literally has sections of the city that are regionally under the control of organized gangs or militias, which is the same thing as warlords and their fiefdoms, right? And this is the modern version of that. And this is how it's rolling out. And then we're going to talk about how the officials in their authoritative capacity have become negotiators with these entities rather than establishing rule of law. This is the direction things are going to go in, especially based on some of the ideals of certain political parties and leaders within our country, okay? Criminal armed groups, including a range of factions, exert territorial control and criminal governance over portions of Rio de Janeiro. These groups include gangs and militias. While various gangs have long exerted control over criminal markets and local politics in Brazil's favelas, which is why you now know what they are, militias have grown from vigilante groups into powerful criminal enterprises. Indeed, the militias have grown into parallel powers, exerting criminal governance. The contested space leads to a range of actors occupying the neighborhoods and favelas and competing for control. Mapping the extent and range of territorial control by the various factions, drug traffickers, gangs, and militias helps to illustrate the contours of parallel power and criminal competition. In this case, a group of universities and civil society organizations mapped Rio's criminal parallel state. The study and mapping project was conducted by a team comprised of researchers from the Study Group for New Illegalisms at Fluminense Federal University. Okay? Now, just look at this map. This is just Rio de Janeiro. This is not Brazil. This is just in one city. All of these little sections are under regional control of one faction or another. You have the Comando Vermelho, the Terceiro Comando Puro, Amigo dos Amigos, Milicia, and En Disputa, which is in dispute, of course. Every single colored portion of this is not under the control of the government. It's under the control of the faction that runs that area. What does the government do about it? Well, in case you wanted to know, because this is what our government is likely to try to emulate, because they are, for the most part, idiots that don't understand how this is going to go if they let things get too far, which they're purposefully doing at this point, at least in my opinion. Have you ever heard of the pacification police of Brazil? These were entities that were put together in order to create a safer environment in the favelas where these regional warlords were in control, where the government wasn't in control, where the police could not actually enforce the law. So they tried something different, a little bit more, let's just call it socially acceptable, right? Okay. Pacification of Brazil's urban margins, how police and traffickers co-produce insecurity. Oh, how nice. That sounds really lovely, doesn't it? And this is from 2019. Okay. This is why I'm saying this is our future. And it doesn't take very much research to just read exactly what's going to happen here in 10 or 15 years if things don't turn around, because it's what's happening there already. Okay. So it's all about how this all worked with the police and the gangs and everybody else. But we'll talk about it because, well, this is what we're looking at. And it's very frustrating for me. However, research in countries as diverse as Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Jamaica also suggests that police-criminal relationships at the urban margins are more complicated than this overview implies. Rather than being characterized solely by conflict, governance of such spaces involves complex cycles of negotiation between armed actors. In these negotiations, corrupt payments and more indirect forms of mutual tolerance are used alongside the use of force as bargaining chips. These cycles are shaped by various factors, including the shifting dynamics of illegal markets, criminal organization, and policing tactics. Rio de Janeiro offers an interesting case of shifts in police-criminal relationships in the region. Since the 1980s, it has seen an endemic conflict between rival drug trafficking groups and police for territorial control of many of the city's favelas. The violence and inefficiency of traditional policing tactics based on mobile capture or kill operations eventually led to proposals for a new approach. Beginning in 2008, the Pacifying Police Units, UPP, program was rolled out across many of the city's favelas with the aim of establishing a permanent police presence in these areas. Adapting principles of proximity policing to the specificities of the real context, the program was rhetorically constructed around the notion of reasserting state control over favelas. Early empirical studies of the UPPs emphasized both their positive and negative effects. On one hand, there was a notable fall in violence in areas with pacification units, and many residents reported that drug dealing and weapons had become less visible. On the other, there were widespread reports of repressive tactics being used against residents, including stop and search, curfews, and even bans on social events. Both the positive and the negative aspects seem to suggest that the state, in the form of authoritarian policing practices, had deepened its presence in these favelas. Now, what does this all mean? Well, here, for a quick example of what their negotiations looked like. Several felt police turned a blind eye to illegal activities in the area, that petty crimes such as open drug consumption, theft, and burglary had increased. Police are poorly equipped to deal with such kinds of infraction, firstly, because heavy-handed responses are likely to be widely seen as aggressive and disproportionate. Secondly, because a minimal threshold of evidence is needed for arrests to be made. Okay. What happens is that they make deals with these criminal organizations who own these territories. They say, we will look the other way, just as the UPPs are doing in Brazil right now, in the favelas. They will look the other way from your trafficking, whether or not that's drug or human, right? They'll look the other way from how you're getting your money and how you're making your money and whatever you're doing in the sense of generating profit. As long as you aren't openly being violent in the street or openly selling drugs right out in public squares. Right? And what happens is that the police are now visible, but they're proximal in the sense of not actually looking for trouble. They're only there in the sense of optics. But because they're there and because they still have authority, but they also have a deal with the criminal organizations who run the area to not really mess with them as long as they're behaving, they harass the average person. They harass the law-abiding citizen and force them into complying with their demands and removing their rights in order to maintain that level of safety, aka implementing curfews, telling them they can't have parties, telling them they can't do this, that, or the other thing. It becomes an authoritarian police state where the criminals operate with impunity and the average person suffers the most because the criminals are still, guess what, victimizing the average person. While the police have their hands tied because they made a deal so they can't do anything. And if they do something, the cartel or the gang who controls the area is going to wipe them out because they're way more well financed and heavily armed than these little police units that are more supposed to be, for social order, not necessarily for actual action. And that's exactly what Brazil did in Rio de Janeiro once they let the problem get too far out of hand to where it could no longer be managed. And that is what course we are on. We are on a trajectory where these criminal entities from other countries are setting up shop in the United States to the degree where they're going to have a monopoly of violence in their region. And the police won't have the resources or even the authority in some cases to do anything about it, thanks to their hands being tied by not only the criminal gangs making deals with their supervisors or their administrative state that tells them what they can or can't do, aka like the mayor telling the PD what they can or can't do, right? Weirdly enough, the mayor in Memphis is already meeting with gang leaders. Where do you think that eventually leads to if this is becoming normal practice, right? So all these things start happening, and once these entities get too big or too dangerous over a certain amount of territory, they just are there now. And that's it. And the only way to change that is with extreme use of violence. And will the people who can make those decisions actually go through with something like that at that point? I don't know. But here we are. And I'm not excited about it. It creates a dangerous precedent for our communities. It creates a dangerous future for our children. And it's something that we can't tolerate, which is why you really need to be aware of what's happening in your area, in your community. You need to have the backs of those people who are in your community. If you live in a small town like I do, you have a rural environment. That doesn't stop these people from setting up shop here. They don't care. They do not care. If there's opportunity and there's leverage, they're going to take it, right? And your 4 or 5 person police department might not be able to do much about it, which is why they need to probably know that you might be willing to help them if the time ever comes, right? Like, these are things you should be thinking about right now. This is 1,000 times more likely to actually happen than the police, coming to steal all your preps because, the end of the world happened and you told them your name. So now they're at your house stealing your preps because the end of the world happened and everyone's just scavenging and trying to, every man for himself. This is a far more likely scenario because it's literally happening right now in the U.S., in our country, in states like Colorado, in states like Washington, in states like Florida. Like, this is happening now, right now. And if you're an Asian American, like, you need to be on top of your shit. Like, you should be making sure that your house is like properly secured, it's locked down. These people are using Wi-Fi jammers. They're breaking alarm codes, probably using a flipper, right? Like, who knows what they're doing? But like, they are advanced and sophisticated. They're staking you out. They're watching you for months, getting your patterns down, understanding when you're at work, when you're at home, when you go to exercise, when you walk your dogs. Like, they know all the things about you and you don't even know they exist. So you need to up your game when it comes to protecting your family and yourself. Like, these people are looking for you specifically. And when it comes to these regional warlords trying to set up shop, I mean, you need to really pay attention to what's happening in your area. You have to. The other thing to keep in mind is that this U.S. Air Force Base attack, it could have easily been criminal in nature. I feel like there's a good chance it was, even if it was also militaristic. And the reason I say that is because China works with the Mexican cartels, who works with anyone else who's allowed to be in their territory. If Tren de Aragua is set up in Ciudad Juarez right now, that means they had permission from the cartels who are there to be there. Like, they're not just going to be allowed to set up shop there, right? Like, that's just not how everything works. So, like, there has been negotiations between criminal organizations, and those criminal organizations that are negotiating these deals are also the ones working directly with China to ship as much fentanyl into America as humanly possible. Like, this, it's all connected at the end. The end of the day, it's all interconnected. Even Hezbollah works with the Mexican drug cartels. So, Luke B says, don't kid yourself. If you live near the border, this is already your life. 100%. And our politicians in many parts of our country, especially major urban areas, and I don't care what state you're in. If you live in Houston, Texas, being in Texas doesn't protect you from the fact that you're in Houston, right? Like major cities in general tend to have policies that are more friendly to this type of behavior. That's what we've been demonstrated over the last few years, especially over the last decade, right? So you need to be aware of the fact that this is the most likely areas to be affected because urban areas have a lot more volume when it comes to making money off trafficking or any other illicit activities, right? But rural environments allow for uninterrupted operations, which is why they're also targeted by these entities. They know that no one's going to come knocking. They know that people might not be aware they even exist in the first place, and they're at a much better situation in the sense of not being bothered when it comes to running their op. So I just want everyone to be aware of this. I really do. Like I hit on this topic, I feel like a lot more often than anyone else in the preparedness community. And it's because to me, this is the real issue. Like this is the real thing happening to the country right now, which is why getting out and learning how to double tap with an AR-15 is not the worst thing you could possibly be doing right now, right? But other people who think that the literal end of the world is going to happen, and that's more likely than any of the things we're discussing tonight, will think otherwise and tell you that, learning what edible plants are around your area is more important. Maybe, but you know what? Most of the people in Mexico and Venezuela and all these other questionable countries aren't going around foraging edible plants every day. They're still able to get food at their local convenience store, but they might get shot in the process or robbed or something worse, right? And that's what you should really be considering right now. So I hate to say it, but I mean, it's just like, to me, this is the truth, which is why I'm so enthusiastic and adamant about it and why I think it's so important to bring up. And when I see news reports specifically stating, if you're Asian and you live in America, these people are literally targeting you, I want to tell you about it. You need to know. You need to know. And if you live in Aurora, Colorado, and you didn't know that an entire apartment complex was taken over by a Venezuelan prison gang who's got a reputation for being the most dangerous out there and just put out a hit on every law enforcement officer in the country, you should probably know that. It's probably important. It's probably a lot more important than monkeypox, right? So, law of the minimum, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for telling people that is very important for us to do. Please, if this is good information and it's important to you as well, like the video, share the video, let people know, please. And I'm not just saying that to get YouTube views. I know that's the accusation no matter what I do, so it doesn't really matter to me anymore if that's what people think. But in all reality, like, this is an important message. It just is. But listen, the private live stream starts in, well, it's like 3 minutes. So if you want to be in it, make sure you join the Subscribe Star. If you're interested, you get some exclusive content. You get private communication with me. You also have access to private live streams. And sometimes I send out some pretty cool preparedness incentives to Subscribe Star members as a thank you. Also, if you want to be in the private live stream but don't want to pay $5 a month, which is how much a Subscribe Star costs, you can join the YouTube channel membership with the join button down below. And that will allow you into the private live streams and allows you to support the channel directly, which is very much greatly appreciated. Just so anyone knows, if you can't afford a membership, I 100% understand, and I don't expect you to. But I will say that there are people who want to support this channel directly, so I give them that opportunity. And my way of saying thank you is by having these private live streams. There is no important information hidden behind a paywall here, so I don't discuss things that are important to your knowledge to have. All that information remains free. We just have casual chats that usually devolve into gun talk. And I'm not going to lie to you, that's what it turns into. So I will be jumping over there. If you're a member, it'll be on my channel page on the community tab. You'll have the link posted there. If you're on Subscribe Star, it'll be on your feed. Anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. Replay crew, thank you so much for checking back in. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper. There you go, Dorian Gray.